Welcome to our channel, where history comes to life. Today, we unravel the secrets of the Tudor dynasty, exploring hidden betrayals, royal scandals, and untold stories. From Henry VIII's 6 wives to Elizabeth I's legendary reign, join us as we trace this powerful family tree and uncover its deepest mysteries. The Tudor dynasty, a family tree with secrets, betrayals, and untold royal scandals. Part 1. The Roots of the Tudor Dynasty. The story of the Tudor dynasty begins not with kings or queens, but with a man of humble origins who would change the course of history forever. Owain ap Merdud ap Tudor, later known as Owain Tudor, was a Welsh courtier from a noble but unremarkable family, far removed from the power struggles of England's royal court. Yet, through a secret and controversial romance, he would become the unlikely patriarch of one of the most famous dynasties in history. The rise of the Tudors can be traced back to the early 15th century, a time when England was embroiled in conflict both at home and abroad. The 100 Years' War against France raged on, and within England, the seeds of the Wars of the Roses were already beginning to take root. It was in this tumultuous period that Owain Tudor found himself at the English court, serving in the household of Queen Catherine of Valois, the widow of King Henry V. Catherine was a French princess, the daughter of the powerful Charles VI of France, and her marriage to Henry V had been a key part of England's dominance over France. But Henry V's sudden death in 1422, leaving behind their infant son, Henry VI, plunged Catherine into a precarious position. As Dowager Queen, Catherine was expected to remain politically neutral, but as a young widow in her mid-20s, she soon attracted attention. Rumors of her involvement with various courtiers circulated, but it was Owain Tudor who won her heart. The details of their relationship remain elusive, shrouded in secrecy, yet by the late 1420s, it was clear that Catherine had married Owain in secret, a union that defied the expectations of the English nobility. Their marriage was not officially recorded, and no contemporary chronicler confirmed it at the time, but the evidence of their children suggests that the union was legitimate. This was an unprecedented match. A former Queen of England marrying a Welsh squire was unheard of and politically dangerous. Owain, though noble by Welsh standards, had no significant influence in English affairs. Their love story was one of passion rather than strategy, and for Catherine, it represented a break from the political constraints imposed upon her. Despite the risks, she bore Owain several children, including Edmund and Jasper Tudor, who would later play crucial roles in shaping England's future. Catherine's defiance did not go unnoticed. Parliament, wary of her influence, passed a law preventing the remarriage of the Queen without royal approval. Though this law came too late to stop her union with Owain, it reflected the growing anxiety among England's elite over the potential consequences of such an alliance. The union was ultimately short-lived, as Catherine's health began to decline. She died in 1437, leaving behind her young sons and a vulnerable husband. Owain's fate took a dramatic turn following Catherine's death. With no powerful protector, he soon found himself imprisoned by political enemies who saw him as an upstart without rightful claim to influence. Yet Owain was not a man easily broken. Displaying the resilience that would become a hallmark of the Tudor line, he escaped from captivity, was later recaptured, and eventually reconciled with the English court. His sons, Edmund and Jasper, were taken under the protection of their half-brother, King Henry VI, who recognized them as legitimate members of the royal family despite their father's low status. It was Edmund Tudor who would secure the future of the dynasty. Through a carefully orchestrated marriage to Lady Margaret Beaufort, a young heiress descended from John of Gaunt, Edmund brought the Tudor line closer to the English throne. The Beauforts, though barred from royal succession under previous agreements, still carried Lancastrian blood, making their offspring potential claimants. This marriage, arranged with the approval of Henry VI, would soon prove crucial. Edmund's untimely death in 1456 left his wife, Margaret, widowed and pregnant at just 13 years old. But the child she carried would change the course of English history. In 1457, Margaret gave birth to Henry Tudor, a boy who would one day rise from exile to claim the throne of England as Henry VII. This child, born into uncertainty and danger, carried within him the combined bloodlines of the Tudors and the Lancastrians, making him both a target and a symbol of hope. The Wars of the Roses, a brutal conflict between the rival houses of Lancaster and York, would shape Henry's destiny. His mother, Margaret, fiercely protected his claim, ensuring that he survived through shifting alliances and political turmoil. Meanwhile, his uncle Jasper Tudor played a crucial role as his protector, guiding him through exile and preparing him for the fight that lay ahead. The unlikely journey of the Tudors, from a secret marriage to a contested throne, was a testament to both chance and ambition. Owain Tudor, a man of no great consequence in his time, had set into motion a series of events that would alter England's history forever. His secret romance with the Queen, his children's rise through the ranks of nobility, and his grandson's eventual victory at Bosworth would cement the Tudors as one of the most legendary dynasties the world has ever known. As history moved forward, the legacy of Owain and Catherine's love story remained hidden beneath the grander narratives of kings and queens. But without this seemingly insignificant union, there would have been no Henry VII, no Henry VIII, and no Elizabeth I. The dynasty that reshaped England was born not in palaces or battlefields, but in the shadows of courtly intrigue and forbidden love. To understand the Tudors is to understand the power of the unexpected. Their story was never one of inevitability but of resilience, adaptation, and sheer determination. The next chapter in their tale would begin with Henry VII's ascent to power, a moment that would mark the true beginning of Tudor rule and set England on a path toward its most defining era. Part 2. The Rise of Henry VII. The Tudor dynasty was not destined for the throne. It was forged in exile, rebellion, and bloodshed. When Henry Tudor was born in 1457, his claim to the English crown was weak and uncertain, overshadowed by the might of the ruling House of York. Yet, through careful maneuvering, unwavering ambition, and a stroke of fate, he would become Henry VII, the first Tudor king of England. Henry's early years were shaped by the brutal conflict known as the Wars of the Roses, a civil war between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. As the son of Edmund Tudor and Margaret Beaufort, Henry carried Lancastrian blood, but his claim came through the Beaufort line, a family whose right to the throne had been legally questioned for generations. His father, Edmund, had died before Henry was even born, leaving Margaret a widowed girl of just 13. From the moment of his birth, Henry was a political pawn, his survival dependent on the shifting fortunes of war. The reign of Henry VI, the last Lancastrian king, was crumbling. Plagued by mental instability and surrounded by factional infighting, he proved unable to control the ambitions of his rivals. In 1461, Edward IV of the House of York seized the throne, defeating the Lancastrians in a series of decisive battles. For the young Henry Tudor, this meant exile and uncertainty. When Henry VI briefly regained the throne in 1470, there was a moment of hope, but it was short-lived. The following year, Edward IV returned, crushed the Lancastrians, and had Henry VI murdered in the Tower of London. With the fall of the Lancastrians, Henry Tudor became one of the last surviving heirs to their cause. His mother, Margaret Beaufort, worked tirelessly to protect him, but the Yorkists saw him as a threat. Forced into exile in Brittany under the protection of Duke Francis II, Henry grew up far from England, watching from a distance as the Yorkist reign unfolded. Though removed from the action, he was not forgotten. His mother and her allies continued to plot his return, believing that one day he might reclaim the throne in the name of Lancaster. The political landscape changed dramatically in 1483 with the sudden death of Edward IV. His young son, Edward V, was meant to inherit the crown, but his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, seized power, declaring Edward illegitimate and taking the throne as Richard III. Soon after, Edward V and his younger brother disappeared into the Tower of London, never to be seen again. The alleged murder of the princes in the Tower cast a shadow over Richard III's reign, fueling opposition against him. For those who resented Richard's rule, Henry Tudor became a figure of hope, a challenger who could restore stability. In 1485, after years of preparation and negotiation, Henry Tudor finally made his move. With financial backing from France and the support of discontented English nobles, he set sail from Brittany with a small but determined army. His destination was England, and his goal was the throne. He landed in Wales, the land of his Tudor ancestors, rallying support from those who still remembered his family's Welsh roots. His forces marched toward the decisive battle that would determine the fate of the English crown. On August 22, 1485, the Battle of Bosworth Field took place. Richard III's army outnumbered Henry's, but divisions among Richard's men weakened his position. Key nobles, including Thomas Stanley and William Stanley, held back their forces, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious before committing to the fight. As battle raged, Richard, a seasoned warrior, fought bravely, leading a charge directly toward Henry in a desperate bid to end the conflict quickly. But the tide turned against him. The Stanleys, who had pretended to be neutral, suddenly entered the battle on Henry's side, sealing Richard's fate. Surrounded and outnumbered, Richard III was cut down, the last English king to die in battle. With Richard dead, Henry Tudor was declared King of England on the battlefield. The Tudor dynasty was born. The battered crown of England was retrieved from the fallen king's corpse and placed upon Henry's head, marking the end of the Wars of the Roses and the beginning of a new era. Yet, while Bosworth secured his throne, his reign was far from safe. Many still saw him as a usurper, a man with a weak claim who had simply taken advantage of a divided kingdom. Henry knew that to cement his rule, he needed to unite the fractured realm. His first act as king was to marry Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter of Edward IV. This marriage symbolized the reconciliation of the warring factions, blending the red rose of Lancaster with the white rose of York to create the iconic Tudor rose, a symbol of unity. By joining the two houses, Henry sought to heal the wounds of decades of civil war and secure his children's uncontested claim to the throne. Yet, challenges remained. Despite his marriage and victory, threats to his rule persisted. Discontented Yorkists plotted against him, and pretenders claiming to be lost York princes emerged to challenge his authority. The most famous of these was Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two vanished princes in the Tower. Though Henry ultimately defeated these threats, his reign was marked by paranoia and a relentless pursuit of stability. Henry VII was not a warrior king like his predecessor Richard III, nor was he a charismatic leader like his son Henry VIII. Instead, he was a calculating and methodical ruler, obsessed with financial security and political control. He introduced policies to weaken the power of rebellious nobles, strengthened England's economy, and established a system of government that would endure for generations. Under his rule, England transitioned from a war-torn kingdom into a more centralized and financially stable monarchy. By the time of his death in 1509, Henry VII had secured the Tudor dynasty's place in history. He had transformed his fragile claim into an unshakable legacy, ensuring that his son, the young and ambitious Henry VIII, would inherit a kingdom that was stronger and more unified than it had been in decades. The foundations of the Tudor Golden Age had been laid, but new challenges awaited. The story of the Tudors was far from over. The next chapter would belong to Henry VIII, a king whose rule would redefine England in ways no one could have foreseen. Part 3. A Strategic Marriage and the Tudor Legacy. Henry VII's victory at Bosworth Field had given him the crown, but his rule was far from secure. Though he had defeated Richard III and ended the Wars of the Roses, England remained a fractured kingdom, its nobility divided between those loyal to the fallen House of York and those who cautiously supported the new Tudor regime. Henry understood that to truly consolidate his power, he needed more than just military success. He needed a symbol of unity that would heal the wounds of the past. That symbol came in the form of Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter of Edward IV and the rightful heir of the Yorkist line. Her marriage to Henry would be more than a union of two individuals. It would be the merging of two warring dynasties, sealing the conflict between Lancaster and York with the promise of a peaceful future. The idea of such a marriage had been discussed even before Henry claimed the throne, with his supporters rallying around the possibility of uniting the rival houses through Elizabeth. Now, as king, Henry made it a priority to fulfill this promise. On January 18, 1486, the wedding of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York took place at Westminster Abbey. The ceremony was carefully orchestrated to emphasize the union of Lancaster and York, with the new royal emblem, the Tudor rose, displayed prominently. This symbol, blending the red rose of Lancaster with the white rose of York, became a powerful image of reconciliation, used extensively in Tudor propaganda to reinforce the idea that Henry's rule represented a new, stable England. Despite the political importance of their marriage, the personal relationship between Henry and Elizabeth remains a subject of speculation. Unlike many royal couples of the time, they appear to have had a genuine affection for one another. Historical records suggest that Elizabeth played an active role in court life and was a devoted mother to their children. Unlike his son Henry VIII, who would become infamous for his treatment of wives, Henry VII remained loyal to Elizabeth, and there is no evidence of him taking mistresses or engaging in open infidelity. However, their marriage was not without tragedy. The couple's first child, Prince Arthur, was born in September 1486, less than a year after their wedding. His birth was met with great celebration, as he represented the future of the Tudor dynasty, a living embodiment of the union between Lancaster and York. Named after the legendary King Arthur, he was expected to usher in a golden age for England. But fate had other plans. In 1501, Arthur was married to Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess whose powerful family alliance was meant to strengthen England's ties with Spain. Yet, just months after their wedding, Arthur fell gravely ill and died in April 1502, leaving the Tudor succession in jeopardy. His death devastated Henry VII and Elizabeth, and for the first time, cracks appeared in their seemingly strong marriage. Elizabeth, already weakened from childbirth, consoled her husband by reminding him that they were still young and could have more sons. But tragedy struck again in 1503, when she died at the age of 37, likely due to complications from childbirth. Her death was a profound loss for Henry VII. Though he had always been a pragmatic and politically minded ruler, the loss of Elizabeth seemed to break something within him. He withdrew from court life, became increasingly obsessed with financial security, and never remarried despite offers of alliances with foreign princesses. His final years were spent in isolation, burdened by grief and paranoia, as he worked tirelessly to secure the throne for his only surviving son, Prince Henry, who would later become Henry VIII. Though Elizabeth of York's life was relatively short, her legacy endured. Through her children, she secured the Tudor dynasty, ensuring that the descendants of both Lancaster and York ruled England for generations. Her daughter, Margaret Tudor, would go on to marry James IV of Scotland, creating a link that would eventually lead to the union of the English and Scottish crowns under James I in 1603. Her other daughter, Mary Tudor, would become Queen of France and later Duchess of Suffolk, influencing European politics in her own right. But it was her son, Henry VIII, who would define the future of England in ways neither she nor Henry VII could have foreseen. While Henry VII's reign is often overshadowed by the drama of his son's rule, it was his strategic marriage to Elizabeth of York that laid the groundwork for the Tudor dynasty's success. Without this union, England might have remained a kingdom torn by civil war, with rival claimants vying for the throne indefinitely. By merging the two houses, Henry and Elizabeth brought an end to decades of instability and created a legacy that would shape England's destiny. Even after Elizabeth's death, her image remained central to Tudor propaganda. Her role as the peacebringer between Lancaster and York was emphasized in portraits, literature, and royal ceremonies, reinforcing the idea that the Tudors had brought order to England after years of chaos. The marriage that had begun as a political necessity became one of the most significant unions in English history, ensuring that the Tudor name would be remembered not only for conquest and power but for the legacy of unity it left behind. As Henry VII's own life neared its end in 1509, he could take some comfort in knowing that the dynasty he had fought so hard to establish was now secure. His son, the young and ambitious Henry VIII, stood ready to inherit a kingdom free from the civil wars that had plagued his predecessors. But peace would not last long. The next chapter of the Tudor story would be marked by religious upheaval, scandal, and the pursuit of an heir that would change the course of history forever. Part 4. Henry VIII, the King Who Changed England. When Henry VIII ascended the throne in 1509, England was on the verge of a new era. The young king was just 17 years old, full of promise, energy, and ambition. Unlike his cautious and financially frugal father, Henry VIII had grand visions of kingship. He wanted to be a warrior, a patron of the arts, and a ruler whose legacy would be remembered for centuries. What no one could predict at the time was how profoundly he would transform England, not just politically but also religiously and culturally. Henry had not been raised to be king. His older brother, Prince Arthur, had been the heir apparent, trained from birth to rule. But when Arthur died unexpectedly in 1502, Henry was thrust into the position of heir, and his life changed forever. His father, Henry VII, became even more protective of him, ensuring that he received an education fit for a future ruler. He was taught Latin, theology, philosophy, and humanist ideals, developing a sharp intellect and a deep appreciation for learning. He also excelled in sports such as jousting, hunting, and tennis, building a reputation as a strong and athletic prince. By the time he took the throne, he was one of the most well-educated and physically imposing monarchs in Europe. One of Henry's first acts as king was to marry Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess who had previously been Arthur's wife. Their marriage was both a political and personal decision. Spain was England's most powerful ally, and an alliance with Ferdinand and Isabella ensured that England remained strong in European affairs. But there was also a personal connection. Henry and Catherine had known each other for years, and Henry had reportedly been infatuated with her. With the blessing of the Pope, they were married, and Catherine was crowned Queen of England alongside Henry. For the first years of his reign, Henry VIII was everything his subjects had hoped for. He was charismatic, generous, and eager to prove himself as a strong leader. He revived England's military ambitions, launching campaigns in France and Scotland, determined to secure his place as a great warrior king. He also patronized scholars and artists, bringing the Renaissance to England and fostering a court filled with music, literature, and intellectual debate. Unlike his father, who had ruled with caution, Henry VIII sought glory. But beneath this golden image, cracks were beginning to form. One of the greatest pressures facing any king was the issue of succession, and this would become the defining struggle of Henry's reign. His wife, Catherine, gave birth to several children, but only one survived, Princess Mary, born in 1516. The absence of a male heir cast a shadow over Henry's rule. England had never been ruled by a queen in her own right, and Henry feared that without a son, the Tudor dynasty would collapse. It was around this time that Henry's attention began to shift toward Anne Boleyn, a young and intelligent woman who had recently returned from the French court. Unlike other mistresses, Anne refused to be Henry's lover unless he made her his wife. The problem was that Henry was already married to Catherine of Aragon, and divorce was nearly impossible under Catholic law. Yet, Henry was determined to have Anne and a son. This personal obsession soon became a national crisis. When Pope Clement VII refused to grant Henry an annulment, Henry took a radical step. He broke away from the Catholic Church entirely. This led to the English Reformation, one of the most dramatic religious shifts in history. In 1534, Henry declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, severing ties with Rome and making himself the ultimate authority on religious matters in England. This move not only allowed him to marry Anne Boleyn but also gave him immense control over the wealth and power of the English Church. Anne Boleyn was crowned queen in 1533, and soon after, she gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. This was not the male heir Henry had longed for, and Anne's position became increasingly unstable. Their marriage, once filled with passion, soon turned sour as Anne failed to provide a son. In 1536, Anne was arrested on charges of adultery, treason, and witchcraft, and after a swift trial, she was executed. Henry's break from Rome had been justified in the name of love, yet now Anne was gone, and Henry was once again searching for a wife to bear him a son. Over the years, Henry VIII would marry 6 times, each marriage bringing its own drama, scandal, and political consequences. His third wife, Jane Seymour, finally gave him what he had always wanted, a son, Prince Edward, born in 1537. But Jane died shortly after childbirth, leaving Henry heartbroken. As Henry aged, his physical and mental health deteriorated. The once athletic and handsome king became obese and riddled with illness, suffering from ulcers, infections, and possibly diabetes. His paranoia grew, and his court became a place of betrayal and executions, with even his closest advisors fearing his wrath. He married 3 more times, Anne of Cleves, a political match that ended in divorce, Catherine Howard, who was executed for adultery, and Catherine Parr, who outlived him, but none could bring him lasting peace. By the time Henry VIII died in 1547, he had fundamentally transformed England. His decision to break from Rome and establish the Church of England had far-reaching consequences, leading to decades of religious conflict between Protestants and Catholics. His obsession with an heir had driven him to execute 2 of his wives and reshape English law. And his extravagant spending on wars and palaces had drained the royal treasury, leaving his successors with financial instability. Yet, for all his faults, Henry VIII was undeniably one of the most influential monarchs in English history. He had turned England into a major European power, redefined the monarchy, and left behind a dynasty that would continue to shape the world. His daughter, Mary I, would attempt to restore Catholicism, while his other daughter, Elizabeth I, would cement England's place as a dominant force on the world stage. The story of the Tudors was far from over. Henry VIII's death was not the end of the dynasty, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one that would see the rise of some of the most famous figures in history. Part 5. The tumultuous reigns of Edward VI and Mary I. When Henry VIII died in 1547, his long-awaited son, Edward VI, ascended the throne. But England's hopes for a stable and lasting Tudor rule were quickly overshadowed by the reality of Edward's youth and fragile health. At just 9 years old, he was England's first true Protestant king, inheriting a country deeply divided by religious tensions and still adjusting to the dramatic changes brought about by his father's break from Rome. Edward's short reign would be dominated by religious reform, political struggles, and the looming question of what would happen if he failed to survive into adulthood. Because of his age, real power rested in the hands of his regents, the most influential being his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset. Seymour ruled as Lord Protector, essentially controlling the government in Edward's name. Though an experienced soldier, he faced enormous challenges in keeping the country stable. His policies leaned heavily toward Protestant reform, further pushing England away from Catholic traditions. This included the abolition of Latin Mass, the removal of religious images from churches, and the introduction of the Book of Common Prayer in 1549. But while Protestant reformers welcomed these changes, much of England, particularly in the countryside, remained attached to traditional Catholic practices. Rebellions broke out, most notably the Prayer Book Rebellion, as conservative factions resisted Somerset's reforms. Somerset's downfall came as England fell into economic hardship and growing unrest. He was overthrown by John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, who took control of the government and steered England even further toward Protestantism. Under Northumberland's influence, Edward VI became a more active ruler, eager to ensure that England remained a Protestant nation. But Edward's greatest challenge was his health. By 1553, he was suffering from a serious illness, likely tuberculosis, and it became clear that he would not survive much longer. With no direct male heirs, the question of succession became a crisis. According to Henry VIII's will, the throne should have passed to Edward's half-sister, Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. But Mary was a devout Catholic, and Edward was determined to prevent England from returning to Catholic rule. To block her succession, he and his advisors devised a controversial plan. Edward altered the line of succession, bypassing Mary and his other half-sister, Elizabeth, in favor of Lady Jane Grey, a distant Tudor relative who was Northumberland's daughter-in-law and a committed Protestant. Edward died in July 1553, and Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed queen. But her reign lasted just 9 days. Mary, with the support of the English people, many of whom remained Catholic, marched on London, overthrew Northumberland's government, and seized the crown. Lady Jane was imprisoned and, after several months, executed on Mary's orders. With this dramatic turn of events, Mary I became England's first reigning queen, marking a new and deeply troubled chapter in the Tudor dynasty. Mary's reign was defined by one goal: to restore England to Catholicism. As the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, she had suffered under Henry VIII's religious policies, watching her mother cast aside and her own legitimacy questioned. Now, as queen, she saw it as her divine duty to undo her father's and brother's reforms and bring England back under the authority of the Pope in Rome. Her first major action was to repeal Edward VI's Protestant laws and re-establish Catholic practices. Priests were once again allowed to conduct Latin Mass, Protestant clergy were removed from office, and England officially rejoined the Catholic Church. But Mary's most infamous policy was her brutal suppression of Protestantism. Determined to stamp out religious opposition, she ordered the execution of over 280 Protestants, many of whom were burned at the stake. These events earned her the enduring nickname, Bloody Mary. Mary's reign was also shaped by her controversial marriage to Philip II of Spain, a powerful Catholic monarch. The marriage was deeply unpopular in England, as many feared it would lead to Spanish control over the country. Although Philip was named king alongside Mary, English laws prevented him from exercising real power, and his influence remained limited. Their union failed to produce an heir, leaving Mary devastated. As Mary's reign progressed, her popularity declined further. Her religious persecutions alienated many English subjects, even some Catholics who were uncomfortable with the severity of her policies. Worse still, England suffered economic hardship, including failed harvests, rising inflation, and a disastrous war with France that led to the humiliating loss of Calais, England's last remaining territory on the European mainland. By 1558, Mary's health had deteriorated significantly, and she died at the age of 42, leaving behind a kingdom still in turmoil. Mary's failure to produce an heir meant that the throne passed to her half-sister, Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn. A Protestant once again sat on England's throne, and the religious policies Mary had fought so hard to enforce were about to be reversed once more. With Elizabeth's I's rise to power, England would enter a new golden age, but the wounds of religious conflict and political instability left by Edward VI and Mary I would not be easily forgotten. Part 6: Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen and the Golden Age. When Elizabeth I took the throne in 1558, England was a nation divided and weakened by years of religious conflict, political instability, and economic hardship. Her predecessors, Edward VI and Mary I, had left the kingdom in a fragile state. Edward's Protestant reforms had alienated Catholics, while Mary's harsh persecution of Protestants had left deep scars. England's position on the world stage was uncertain, and the young queen faced immense challenges. Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII, had spent much of her life in uncertainty. Declared illegitimate after her mother's execution in 1536, she had been restored to the line of succession but remained a figure of political intrigue throughout Mary I's reign. As a Protestant, she had been closely watched during Mary's Catholic rule, at times even fearing for her life. But when Mary died without an heir, Elizabeth, at just 25 years old, suddenly found herself queen of a deeply troubled nation. One of her first and most critical decisions was how to handle religion. England had swung violently between Protestantism and Catholicism under her half-siblings, and Elizabeth needed a solution that would end the chaos. Her answer was the Elizabethan religious settlement, a compromise that made England officially Protestant but retained elements of Catholic tradition. The Act of Uniformity, 1559, reintroduced the Book of Common Prayer, while the Act of Supremacy restored the monarch as supreme governor of the Church of England. This careful balance helped to reduce religious tensions, though Catholics and radical Protestants alike remained dissatisfied. Elizabeth's next challenge was securing her position on the throne. As an unmarried woman, she faced constant pressure to marry and produce an heir, but she repeatedly refused. Many suitors, including Philip II of Spain, the Duke of Anjou, and Robert Dudley, sought her hand, yet Elizabeth remained independent. She understood that marriage to a foreign prince could threaten England's sovereignty, while marriage to an English noble could divide her court. Instead, she skillfully played diplomatic games, keeping foreign rulers hopeful without ever committing. Over time, this refusal to marry became part of her legend, earning her the title, the Virgin Queen. One of the greatest threats to her reign came from Mary, Queen of Scots. As Elizabeth's Catholic cousin, Mary had a strong claim to the English throne, and many Catholics saw her as England's rightful queen. After being forced to abdicate in Scotland, Mary fled to England in 1568, seeking Elizabeth's protection. But rather than offering her sanctuary, Elizabeth imprisoned Mary for nearly 20 years. The Catholic world saw Mary as a martyr, and several plots were uncovered to place her on the English throne. After the Babington Plot, 1586, in which Mary was accused of conspiring to assassinate Elizabeth, the Queen finally ordered her cousin's execution in 1587. Though reluctant to execute a fellow monarch, Elizabeth knew that Mary remained a danger to her rule. As Elizabeth secured her power at home, she also transformed England into a dominant naval force. The 16th century saw intensified rivalry with Spain, the most powerful Catholic kingdom in Europe. Elizabeth's support for English privateers, such as Sir Francis Drake, angered King Philip II, as these men attacked Spanish ships and stole treasure from the Americas. Tensions reached their peak in 1588, when Philip launched the Spanish Armada, a fleet of over 130 ships, with the goal of invading England and overthrowing Elizabeth. But England's superior naval tactics, combined with bad weather, led to a stunning victory. The defeat of the Spanish Armada cemented Elizabeth's reputation as a strong and capable leader, proving that England could stand against the greatest powers of Europe. This victory also boosted national pride, strengthening the image of Elizabeth as a queen divinely favored by God. Elizabeth's reign also ushered in what is known as the Golden Age of England. Culturally, this was a period of great artistic and literary achievement, with figures such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser emerging as some of the greatest writers in history. Theaters flourished, with Shakespeare's plays captivating audiences at the Globe Theatre, while poetry and music thrived under royal patronage. England's economy expanded, fueled by growing trade networks and exploration. Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake led expeditions that expanded England's influence in the New World, laying the groundwork for future English colonies. Despite these successes, Elizabeth's later years were not without challenges. War with Spain dragged on, draining England's finances, while rebellions in Ireland tested her authority. The death of her closest advisor, William Cecil, and the execution of her longtime favorite, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, left her increasingly isolated. By the early 1600s, England was changing, and Elizabeth, once the vibrant young queen, had become an aged and weary ruler. She died in March 1603, at the age of 69, after ruling for 44 years. With no direct heirs of her own, the throne passed to James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, uniting England and Scotland under a single monarch. This marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart era. Elizabeth I's legacy remains one of strength, intelligence, and enduring leadership. She not only secured the Protestant future of England but also turned the nation into a global power, setting the stage for its future empire. Her reign is remembered as one of the greatest in English history, and her influence can still be felt centuries later. Part 7. The End of the Tudor Dynasty and the Rise of the Stuarts. With the death of Elizabeth I in 1603, the glorious reign of the Tudor dynasty came to an end. For over a century, the Tudors had ruled England, transforming it from a divided medieval kingdom into a powerful Protestant nation with a global presence. But the dynasty's final years were marked by a fundamental question: who would rule after Elizabeth? Unlike her father, Henry VIII, Elizabeth never married and had no children. This meant that, for the first time since the Wars of the Roses, England faced a dynastic shift. In her final years, the Queen was aware of the looming succession crisis. She refused to officially name an heir, but many in her court anticipated that the throne would pass to James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. Though Mary had been executed on Elizabeth's orders, her son had been raised as a Protestant and had long positioned himself as the natural successor to the English crown. James had a strong claim to the throne through his great-grandmother, Margaret Tudor, who was Henry VIII's older sister. This connection made him the closest legitimate heir from the Tudor bloodline, even though he was from the House of Stuart. By the time of Elizabeth's death, English nobles and advisors had already negotiated with James, ensuring a peaceful transition of power. With Elizabeth's passing, James was proclaimed King James I of England, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland under one monarch for the first time. This new era, known as the Stuart period, marked a dramatic shift in English history, yet the influence of the Tudors remained deeply ingrained in the kingdom. Under their rule, England had broken from the Catholic Church, established itself as a naval power, and laid the foundations for what would become a global empire. Though the Tudors had ended, their legacy endured. James I, despite his intelligence and experience as King of Scotland, struggled to command the same level of respect and authority as Elizabeth. He believed strongly in the divine right of kings, the idea that monarchs ruled by God's will and were answerable only to him. This clashed with the growing power of Parliament, leading to tensions that would only intensify under his son, Charles I. Though James tried to maintain stability, his reign was marked by political challenges, financial struggles, and religious divisions. His failure to navigate these difficulties effectively paved the way for future conflicts, including the English Civil War, which would ultimately lead to the execution of a king and the temporary abolition of the monarchy. Yet, despite the Stuart challenges, the England that James inherited was vastly different from the one that Henry VII had ruled over a century earlier. The Tudors had taken a fractured medieval kingdom and shaped it into a centralized modern state, leaving behind a nation that would continue to expand its influence for centuries to come. Thus, the Tudor dynasty may have ended with Elizabeth's death, but its impact on England, and the world, was far from over. Part 8. Secrets within the Tudor bloodline. The Tudor dynasty is remembered for its dramatic reigns, political triumphs, and religious transformations, but beneath the surface lay secrets, scandals, and hidden truths that shaped their history. The Tudors were a family built on ambition and survival, yet their bloodline carried mysteries that historians continue to debate. From hidden heirs and secret affairs to concealed illnesses and mysterious deaths, the dynasty's family tree is riddled with enigmatic twists. One of the greatest Tudor secrets revolves around the legitimacy of Henry VII's claim to the throne. The first Tudor king was descended from John of Gaunt and Catherine Swynford, but their children, known as the Beaufort family, were originally born out of wedlock. Though later legitimized by royal decree, a crucial clause in the ruling stated that they could never inherit the throne. Henry VII's right to rule was therefore legally questionable, though this detail was carefully suppressed during his reign. To secure his dynasty, Henry ensured that any threats to his claim were eliminated, including potential Yorkist rivals who had a stronger bloodline connection to Edward III. Another long-debated mystery is the fate of the princes in the Tower, Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. When Richard III took the throne in 1483, the young princes were imprisoned in the Tower of London and were never seen again. Many believe that Richard had them murdered to secure his rule, but some theories suggest that one or both boys may have survived. Henry VII, keen to strengthen his own claim, had a vested interest in ensuring that the princes were truly dead, leading some to speculate that he silenced any surviving Yorkist heirs. Henry VIII's personal life is another source of Tudor secrets, many of which were deliberately covered up. Though his 6 marriages are well documented, rumors persist that he had several illegitimate children, some of whom may have played significant roles in Tudor politics. His acknowledged illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, was granted noble titles and even considered as a possible heir before dying young. But whispers of other secret children, potentially including figures like Catherine Knowles, who served Elizabeth I, have led to ongoing speculation about the true extent of Henry's lineage. One of the most chilling mysteries of the Tudor period is the sudden downfall of Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII's second wife was arrested, tried, and executed in 1536, accused of adultery, treason, and incest. Many historians believe the charges were fabricated to clear the way for Henry's marriage to Jane Seymour, but some suggest a deeper conspiracy. Was Anne the victim of a political plot, or was there truth to the accusations? Her execution remains one of history's most controversial events, leaving unanswered questions about the motivations behind her downfall. The Tudor dynasty's final monarch, Elizabeth I, carried secrets of her own, particularly regarding her romantic life and possible offspring. Though famously known as the Virgin Queen, speculation has persisted that Elizabeth may have had secret lovers and even children. The most infamous theory suggests that she and her longtime favorite, Robert Dudley, had a hidden son, often linked to the mysterious figure of Arthur Dudley, who appeared in Spain claiming to be Elizabeth's child. While no definitive proof exists, the idea that Elizabeth may have secretly broken her vow of chastity continues to intrigue historians. Even the deaths of Tudor rulers are surrounded by unanswered questions. Henry VIII's declining health and erratic behavior suggest he may have suffered from conditions such as diabetes, syphilis, or Cushing's syndrome, though his exact illness remains a mystery. Edward VI's sudden death at 15 years old is widely attributed to tuberculosis, but some theories suggest he may have been poisoned by those seeking to manipulate the line of succession. Mary I's death at 42 was officially recorded as uterine cancer, but rumors circulated that she had suffered from a condition resembling a phantom pregnancy, leading some to suspect she had been slowly poisoned. With so many untold stories, concealed truths, and lingering mysteries, the Tudor dynasty remains one of the most enigmatic in history. Though their reign has ended, their secrets continue to fascinate, intrigue, and inspire new discoveries centuries later. Part 9. The Lost Heirs and Forgotten Tudors. The Tudor dynasty is often remembered for its most famous monarchs, Henry VII, Henry VIII, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Their legacies have shaped history, but beneath the surface of this powerful lineage lie forgotten figures and lost heirs, individuals whose stories were overshadowed, erased, or deliberately hidden. These overlooked Tudors, whether born into obscurity or eliminated as threats, played significant roles in the dynasty's unfolding drama. One of the earliest forgotten Tudors was Edmund Tudor, 1st Earl of Richmond, the father of Henry VII. Though his descendants would rule England for over a century, Edmund's own life was tragically short. He was the son of Owen Tudor and Catherine of Valois, the widow of Henry V, but his royal connections did not guarantee an easy life. As a loyal Lancastrian, He was imprisoned by Yorkist forces during the Wars of the Roses and died of the plague in 1456, leaving his pregnant wife, Margaret Beaufort, to give birth to the future Henry VII in secrecy. His early death meant that Henry grew up without a father, shaping his cautious and strategic nature as a ruler. Another lost heir was Arthur, Prince of Wales, Henry VIII's elder brother and the original Tudor heir. As the firstborn son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, Arthur was groomed to rule, receiving an elite education and marrying Catherine of Aragon in 1501. However, just months after his marriage, Arthur died suddenly at the age of 15, leaving England's future uncertain. The cause of his death remains a mystery. Some suggest tuberculosis, while others suspect a sudden respiratory illness. His death changed the course of history, as his younger brother Henry VIII took the throne and later married Catherine of Aragon, setting in motion the events that would lead to England's break from Rome. Beyond legitimate heirs, there were also rumored and forgotten Tudor children, particularly those linked to Henry VIII. While he officially acknowledged only one illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, rumors swirled about other potential heirs. One name that frequently emerges is Catherine Knowles, believed by some to be the secret daughter of Henry VIII and Mary Boleyn, and Boleyn's sister. Though never formally recognized, Catherine and her descendants held close positions at court, raising suspicions that Henry had ensured their well-being in quiet acknowledgement of their royal blood. The Tudor dynasty's forgotten figures also include those who were deliberately erased or cast aside due to political necessity. Margaret Clifford, a descendant of Henry VII's daughter Mary, was once considered a potential heir to Elizabeth I but was imprisoned on suspicion of plotting against the Queen. Her connection to the Tudor bloodline made her a threat, and she was kept in isolation, dying under suspicious circumstances. Even Edward VI's forgotten sisters, Lady Jane Grey, Lady Catherine Grey, and Lady Mary Grey, were crucial players in the Tudor succession struggles. Jane Grey, famously known as the 9 Days Queen, was executed at just 16 years old, but her sisters also suffered due to their Tudor connections. Catherine Grey secretly married without royal permission, leading Elizabeth I to imprison her for life, while Mary Grey, a hunchback noblewoman, was barred from court and forced into obscurity. Their royal blood became more of a curse than a blessing, ensuring they were watched, controlled, and, ultimately, forgotten. These lost heirs and forgotten Tudors remind us that history is often shaped by those whose stories remain untold. While the famous Tudor monarchs carved their names into history, many others, some erased from records, others locked away or eliminated as threats, played hidden but crucial roles in the dynasty's legacy. Part 10. The Role of Women in the Tudor Dynasty. The Tudor dynasty was a time of immense change, and while history often focuses on its kings and battles, the women of the Tudor era played equally vital roles. Whether as queens, regents, advisors, or pawns in dynastic politics, Tudor women shaped the course of England's history in ways that were both visible and hidden. Some were celebrated, others were cast aside, but all left lasting legacies within the intricate web of Tudor power. Few women in history have been as influential as Elizabeth of York, the mother of Henry VIII and the unifying figure who helped end the Wars of the Roses. As the daughter of Edward IV and the wife of Henry VII, her marriage represented the fusion of the rival Lancastrian and Yorkist houses, securing the Tudor claim to the throne. Though she wielded no official power, Elizabeth's quiet presence ensured the survival of her children and the strength of the dynasty she helped establish. Her influence lived on through her son Henry VIII, who idolized her memory even as he dismantled the traditional structures of the monarchy. In stark contrast, Margaret Beaufort, Henry VII's formidable mother, was a woman who never ruled but commanded immense authority. A master strategist, she ensured her son's claim to the throne through careful political maneuvering, alliances, and even military support. As Henry VII ascended to power, Margaret remained a constant presence, effectively acting as his closest advisor. Even after his marriage to Elizabeth of York, Margaret retained a role of great influence, shaping policies and overseeing the royal household with an iron will. Her religious devotion and political cunning solidified the Tudor dynasty's survival in its early years. Yet, no discussion of Tudor women is complete without examining Henry VIII's 6 wives, each of whom played a distinct role in shaping England's future. Catherine of Aragon, his first wife, was a queen of unyielding dignity, whose refusal to accept an annulment led to England's break from the Catholic Church. Anne Boleyn, perhaps the most infamous of the 6, was not only Henry's great passion but also a key player in the Reformation, using her influence to promote Protestant ideals before her dramatic downfall. Jane Seymour, who bore Henry his long-awaited son, Edward VI, was idealized after her early death, while Anne of Cleves outmaneuvered Henry by escaping their marriage with her wealth and reputation intact. Catherine Howard, young and reckless, fell victim to intrigue and scandal, while Catherine Parr, Henry's final wife, ensured the education and survival of his children, particularly Elizabeth I. It was Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch, who proved the full power a woman could wield. Against all odds, she reigned for 45 years, transforming England into a global power and securing the Protestant Reformation. Her refusal to marry earned her the title, the Virgin Queen, though it also forced her to carefully navigate the political landscape of male-dominated Europe. Under her rule, England experienced a golden age of exploration, literature, and military triumph, proving that a queen could not only hold power but excel in it. Beyond the throne, Tudor noblewomen also shaped history in more subtle ways. Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin and rival, spent much of her life as a symbol of Catholic opposition, ultimately leading to her execution. Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, married into the Scottish royal family, setting the stage for the eventual union of the English and Scottish crowns under James I. Women like Bess of Hardwicke, a powerful noblewoman and one of the richest figures of her time, demonstrated how women could rise through ambition and strategic marriages. Even those without noble blood saw their lives change under the Tudors. The dissolution of the monasteries and the rise of Protestantism redefined women's roles in society, shifting their influence away from convents and religious life toward court, marriage, and education. Though opportunities for power remained limited, Tudor women, whether queens or commoners, left a profound mark on history, proving that they were not merely silent figures in a man's world. Part 11. Treason, Conspiracies, and Betrayals in the Tudor Court. The Tudor dynasty was built on ambition, but with ambition came betrayal, conspiracies, and treason, each shaping the course of English history. The Tudor court was a dangerous place, where alliances could shift overnight, and the difference between loyalty and treason was often a matter of royal favor. Many who once stood in power found themselves imprisoned in the Tower of London, while others met their fate on the executioner's block. One of the earliest and most defining betrayals of the Tudor era was the treachery against Richard III, which led to Henry VII's victory at Bosworth in 1485. Though Richard had ruled as king, many of his own nobles, including Sir William Stanley, ultimately betrayed him in battle, helping Henry Tudor claim the throne. Ironically, despite Stanley's role in securing Henry's reign, he too would later fall from favor. In 1495, he was accused of plotting to support Perkin Warbeck, a pretender claiming to be one of the lost princes in the Tower. Henry VII showed no mercy, and Stanley was executed for treason, proving that even the king's most trusted allies were never truly safe. The reign of Henry VIII was particularly marked by treachery and shifting loyalties, as advisors, friends, and even queens fell victim to his changing whims. One of the most shocking betrayals was that of Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry's once loyal chief minister. 4 years, Wolsey controlled much of England's governance, securing Henry's military victories and managing foreign policy, but when he failed to obtain the Pope's approval for Henry's annulment from Catherine of Aragon, he was dismissed and arrested. Before he could be executed, Wolsey died on his way to trial, a victim of Henry's ruthless demand for obedience. Perhaps the most infamous of Henry's betrayals was his execution of Anne Boleyn in 1536. Once the woman he had defied the Pope to marry, and was later accused of adultery, treason, and incest, charges widely believed to have been fabricated by Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister at the time. Her downfall was swift, from queen to prisoner to execution in just weeks, demonstrating the fragile nature of power in the Tudor court. Ironically, just 4 years later, Cromwell himself was arrested and executed, proving that even those who orchestrated betrayals were not immune to them. During the reign of Edward VI, conspiracies arose over the question of succession. The powerful Duke of Northumberland, seeking to control the throne, arranged for his daughter-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, to be declared queen upon Edward's death in 1553. This was a direct betrayal of Edward's half-sister Mary Tudor, who had the stronger claim. However, Northumberland's coup collapsed in just 9 days, and Mary swiftly took power, having both Jane and Northumberland executed. Under Mary I, treasonous plots continued, particularly from Protestants who opposed her Catholic rule. One of the most famous conspiracies was Wyatt's Rebellion in 1554, in which Sir Thomas Wyatt the Younger and his supporters tried to overthrow Mary and prevent her marriage to Philip of Spain. The rebellion was crushed, and Wyatt was executed, but the plot had lasting consequences. It led Mary to suspect her sister, Elizabeth, of involvement. Elizabeth was imprisoned in the Tower of London, narrowly escaping execution, though she remained under surveillance for years. As Elizabeth I took the throne, the Tudor court remained a hotbed of intrigue, with numerous assassination attempts and conspiracies against her. The most famous of these was the Babington Plot in 1586, a Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth and place Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. The plot was uncovered by Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, and led to Mary's trial and execution. Though Mary claimed innocence, her secret letters approving the assassination plot sealed her fate. Even at the very end of the Tudor era, treachery remained a constant threat. Elizabeth's final years saw plots from Catholic Spain, internal dissent, and noble rivalries, all of which contributed to the tension that would carry into the Stuart dynasty. The Tudor court was never a place of stability. It was a world of ambition, deception, and betrayal, where one wrong step could mean death. Part 12. The Decline of the Tudor Dynasty and the End of an Era. The Tudor dynasty began with victory and ambition, but by the time of its final monarch, Elizabeth I, it was clear that the golden age of Tudor rule was coming to an end. The decline of the dynasty was not marked by a single moment of collapse, but rather a gradual weakening, a slow unraveling brought about by dynastic uncertainty, economic challenges, and the aging of England's last Tudor queen. The energy and ruthlessness that had defined the early Tudors had begun to fade, leaving behind a monarchy that was powerful, yet increasingly fragile. One of the first signs of decline came with the early deaths and lack of male heirs among the Tudor rulers. Edward VI, the only legitimate son of Henry VIII, died in 1553 at just 15 years old, leaving the throne vulnerable to power struggles. His death led to the brief and tumultuous reign of Lady Jane Grey, which lasted just 9 days before she was overthrown by Mary I. Mary, though determined to restore Catholicism, was plagued by ill health and an unpopular marriage to Philip II of Spain, dying childless in 1558. With no surviving male Tudor heirs, the fate of the dynasty rested on her half-sister, Elizabeth I. Elizabeth's reign was long and successful, but it did not solve the dynasty's greatest problem, the lack of a direct successor. Unlike her predecessors, Elizabeth never married and never had children, making her the last true Tudor ruler. While her reign was marked by great achievements, the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the expansion of England's influence, and the flourishing of the Elizabethan Golden Age, it was also a time of growing unrest. The lack of an heir created anxiety among her court and the English people, who feared another succession crisis like those seen under Edward VI and Mary I. The final years of Elizabeth's reign were troubled by economic struggles, internal rebellion, and the fading strength of her once mighty court. England had grown rich from trade and exploration, but the costs of war and rising inflation created widespread hardship. The war with Spain, though victorious in some respects, drained the treasury, and continued conflict in Ireland proved costly and unpopular. The Earl of Essex's rebellion in 1601, led by one of Elizabeth's former favorites, was a sign that her control over the nobility was weakening. Though the rebellion was quickly crushed and Essex was executed, it was clear that England was changing, and the Tudor grip on power was loosening. Perhaps the most personal sign of Tudor decline was Elizabeth herself. In her youth, she had been charismatic, intelligent, and politically astute, but by the late 1590s, she was aging, increasingly isolated, and deeply conscious of her mortality. Many of her closest advisors had died, including William Cecil, Lord Burleigh, who had served her faithfully for decades. Even her favorite, Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, had passed away, leaving her court filled with younger nobles who had little personal loyalty to the aging queen. Elizabeth, once famed for her extravagance and wit, became more melancholy and reclusive, haunted by the knowledge that her dynasty would not continue after her death. By 1603, it was clear that the Tudor era was coming to an end. Elizabeth, frail and ill, spent her final days at Richmond Palace, refusing to go to bed and instead sitting in silence for hours. Her once powerful presence had diminished, and those around her waited anxiously for the inevitable. On March 24, 1603, Elizabeth died at the age of 69, bringing the Tudor dynasty to its official close. With no children of her own, the English throne passed to James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and a descendant of Henry VII's daughter, Margaret Tudor. Thus, the Tudor dynasty gave way to the House of Stuart, marking the end of an era that had reshaped England forever. Though the Tudors had fallen, their legacy endured. The dynasty had transformed England from a war-torn kingdom into a global power, ushering in the English Reformation, the Age of Exploration, and the foundation of England's future empire. The end of the Tudors was not the end of their influence, as their policies, cultural achievements, and dynastic marriages shaped the path of English history for centuries to come. Part 13. The Tudor Legacy: Myths, Legends, and Lasting Influence. The Tudor dynasty may have ended with Elizabeth I, but its influence has lived on for centuries. The Tudors left behind a legacy that shaped England's monarchy, religion, culture, and identity, while their lives and reigns became the subject of myths, legends, and endless fascination. From the dramatic rule of Henry VIII to the mystery of the princes in the Tower, the Tudors have been romanticized, villainized, and debated in ways that few other dynasties have. Their story is one of power, betrayal, ambition, and survival, a narrative that continues to capture the imagination of historians, writers, and the public alike. One of the most enduring aspects of Tudor influence is the transformation of the English monarchy. Before the Tudors, England had been plagued by civil war, weak rulers, and rival claims to the throne, but by the time of Elizabeth I's death, the monarchy had become a powerful, centralized institution. The Tudors established the concept of royal supremacy, particularly through Henry VIII's break from the Catholic Church, which placed the English monarch at the head of the Church of England. This shift not only reshaped religion in England but also strengthened the idea of absolute monarchy, a concept that would continue to influence later rulers, including the Stuarts and even modern constitutional monarchs. Perhaps no figure in the Tudor dynasty is more shrouded in legend than Henry VIII. His 6 marriages, his transformation from charming prince to tyrannical ruler, and his role in the English Reformation have made him one of history's most famous kings. Stories of his volatile temper, his execution of 2 wives, and his declining health have only added to the mystique. The image of a larger-than-life Henry VIII, dressed in opulent clothing, glaring from portraits, and ruling with an iron fist, has become one of the most recognizable symbols of Tudor England. Equally legendary is the story of Anne Boleyn, whose rise and fall have been the subject of endless speculation. Was she a political mastermind or a tragic victim? Was she guilty of the crimes she was accused of, or was she framed? Anne's legacy is one of controversy and fascination, and she has been depicted in countless books, plays, and films as both a powerful woman ahead of her time and a doomed figure of ambition. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would ensure that Anne's memory lived on, proving that the blood of a disgraced queen could produce one of England's greatest rulers. Beyond individual figures, the Tudors left a lasting cultural and architectural legacy. The period saw a flourishing of art, literature, and drama, particularly during Elizabeth I's reign, which became known as the Elizabethan Golden Age. William Shakespeare, often considered the greatest playwright in history, thrived under Tudor rule, producing works that defined English literature for generations. The construction of grand palaces, such as Hampton Court, and the remodeling of Windsor Castle, showcased the power and wealth of the Tudor monarchy, and many of these buildings remain key landmarks in Britain today. The Tudors also left behind mysteries that continue to spark debate. The fate of the princes in the Tower, the young sons of Edward IV who disappeared under Richard III's rule, remains one of history's greatest unsolved cases. Was Richard III truly responsible for their deaths, or did Henry VII have a hand in their disappearance? The debate over their fate persists, adding to the intrigue of the Tudor period. Similarly, Elizabeth I's decision never to marry has been the subject of speculation. Was it political strategy, personal choice, or was there a hidden reason behind her lifelong refusal to take a husband? These unsolved questions keep the Tudor era alive in historical research and popular imagination. Even in modern times, the Tudors continue to captivate audiences. Movies, television series, and books about Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, and Elizabeth I remain incredibly popular, with new interpretations constantly emerging. From historical dramas like The Tudors and Wolf Hall to novels by Hilary Mantel and Philippa Gregory, the Tudor dynasty has cemented itself as one of the most intriguing periods in English history. Their political intrigue, dramatic personal lives, and lasting impact on England make them a subject that never loses relevance. The Tudor legacy is one of power, transformation, and enduring influence. They reshaped England's religion, government, and global standing, laying the foundations for the British Empire and the modern monarchy. Though their dynasty ended over 400 years ago, the Tudors remain among the most studied, admired, and debated rulers in history, proving that their story is far from forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Tudor dynasty. Their legacy of power, betrayal, and ambition still shapes history today. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more fascinating stories from the past. See you in the next episode.